Let's start off by just looking at who Sudesh is and his relationship with football.
Yeah, I think I was born into the game. I come from a family where both sides of the family, from the my mom's side, my dad's side, there were people who were involved in the game. Back in the day when there was segregated football, uh, there were two family teams, one in uh, what is now Gauteng, the East Rand, Benoni. There was a family club there called Beria Park, and then my dad's family in KZN, they had a club called Stella. And those were back in the days of when obviously there was segregated football. There were four of my uncles, three of my mom's brothers, and one of my dad's brother, who actually played for the South African Indian team. Because in those days they used to have this interracial tournaments where there were South African Black 11, South African Indian 11, South African Colored 11, South African White 11.
Yeah.
And then obviously the government put a stop to that. So I think football is in my blood. I grew up in that kind of culture.
Yeah.
Although both my parents were not directly involved, but I think the greater family were involved in the game. So I think, yeah, it's been in my blood, and I think it'll be there
Yeah.
till the day I die.
So,
It's not be,
and let's talk about your coaching career now. How did you get into coaching?
Yeah, I think that was an interesting part because I used to play. I was apparently told I was quite a decent player. I played in the old Federation Professional League.
Yeah.
From there, we moved over. I played for a team called Newcastle Dynamos. That was the front runner to a lot of famous names came out from that area. Samora Kulu, late Junior Ngiela, then later years, the Helman Kelele and his brothers, Sizwe Mtaung, Fani Madida. So I played about 2 years in the Federation Professional League, and we were convinced by Brakazem Mtaung, Sarul Kobus, Abdul Bamji to start making a move. At that time, it was the NPSL, but they
Yeah.
could see that there's going to be a move where all the leagues unite. So we moved over to the NPSL. We played in I think it was called the Zambak League. That time it was the second division because they couldn't fit us in. It was 1 year there we played, and then the following year was when the leagues came together, when the NSL was formed. So we were like founding members of the NSL in the late, I think what was it, the late 80s. And then I moved over to Joburg. I played for Dynamos from Forsberg, Ismail Payet's Dynamos. And I suffered a major injury. So at that time, the resources are not there, the medical care is not there. So I had to quit the game. But at that time, under the NSL and the fledgling SAFA, they were starting to do coaching programs, and I was back home in Newcastle, and the guy who mentored me was the president of the local or the regional football association, and also the former club chairman Roy Harry convinced me to start taking coaching courses.
Yeah.
And I think at that time, coincidentally, SAFA put together the first ever SAFA coaching program. It was the coaches program, and Ted Dumitru, the late Ted Dumitru, was the technical director of SAFA at that time. The president was Stix Morewa. I think Danny Jordan was the CEO. So it was in those vibrant 90s,
Yeah.
94, 95, 96, where South African football was in vogue.
Yeah.
So from there, we went through a very intensive training program over 2 years under Ted Dumitru, and also the KNVB were involved.
Yeah.
And the plan was to identify we were about 200 or 300 coaches from all over the country at all levels of the game. The plan from there was to identify about the best 9 or 10 coaches who would then be working in each province as a technical director in the province, coach
Yeah.
education and stuff. So this program was run completely by the KNVB to take away the so-called biasness or whatever, and it
Yeah.
must be done only on merit.
Yeah.
And some of us were chosen to come out of that program over a period of 2 years. Eventually, I think there were 9 or 10 of us that were selected to go for further training to Holland, I think they had to increase it to 10 because from KZN there were 2 of us. It was myself and Zibo Langalala, and the instructors from KNVB said that obviously, although they needed 1 from each province, but they realized that the quality that they were getting, they had to expand the pool,
Sure.
So we went to study in the headquarters of KNVB, Zeist. We were under the tutorship of the legendary Rinus Michels,
Awesome.
And I think that's where he planted a seed, because I think his key statement he made to us is that whatever you learn here in Holland is immaterial. Remember who you are and where you come from, It's different what you are going to do. So don't just copy and paste and take whatever. And I think from there, the coaching bug had bitten. But I think if I look back at my playing career, even from junior football, it was back in the day where you just have a so-called presa who will give you a kit and pay your affiliation fee, but you had to do everything. So I think from the young days, I was the captain, the coach, the player, the kit man, everything,
Yeah.
So it planted that seed of trying to learn about the game and how to train players.
Yeah.
And I think that program that SAFA put up was really revolutionary. It was sad that it had to end the way it ended, because obviously the late Ted felt it was not going the way he wanted. The commercial partners started having more influences, and they wanted more foreign influence to come in, into SAFA. And I think he quit. And I carried on for a while until there was a German technical director, and I think we used to have our challenges, because my concern was about Africanizing the coaching content, But he was very rigid in that he wanted, to do things his way, the German way, and that's how it was. And we used to have clashes.
And what was the story before then? When you talk about you wanted to Africanize the content, and there were those conflicts with the new coaching structure. What was the situation like before his arrival, when it was you guys and Ted Dumitru there? What was the situation?
Yeah, I think that's where it was that very interesting period, because on one side Ted Dumitru had put together, I think that document was called, it was writing also on the government, how the government was changing. It was called Football or Coaching Redevelopment Program, RTP, And it was about designing a philosophy, having South African content, coaching content in the curriculum. So we were already at a very advanced level, because obviously Ted Dumitru and his crew of coaches had started the Chibuku Academy at Orlando in the early 90s. So they had that expertise. Then they had started the Transnet School of Excellence, whereby there were the Sam Batas, Kevin Johnson, Thabo Dlala's, coaches who grew up in that. So it was a proven concept. It wasn't just theory. And we all know the success of that Transnet School of Excellence, whereby over 100 players went on to play professional and international. I mean, the Stephen Pienaars, Paul John Mabizela. We could go on and mention the names,
So are you saying there was a point where I'm asking this because the South African Football Association time and again comes under a lot of criticism as to how they handle the development of the game in the country. So are you saying there was a point where SAFA was headed in the right direction in terms of the development of soccer in that regard?
Absolutely. If you look at that mid-90s period, you look at they had this SAFA, the coaches program. They had the under-20 and under-23 project. But also you look at the success of Pirates winning the Champions League. Then the next year, Bafana winning the AFCON. And even the team that was around Clive Barker was a group of technical experts. It wasn't Clive Barker himself, I mean, there was whole technical staff around him who were analyzing games, and the late Ted was also part of that. So because Bafana used to camp at Esland Park, and that's where the Transnet School of excellence was based.
Yeah.
So even up to today, if you ask Clive Barker about the training sessions, he would always wanted to play games against the boys from School of Excellence because they brought something different, the way they kept possession, the way the creativity, and even the players who were in the 96 squad enjoyed playing those training matches. So there was a project, as you rightfully mentioned, there was a project that I felt if we could have carried on with that project on all sides, the way SAFA was structured. And I must say, you got to give credit to the leaders at that time. Under Stix Morewa, he was visionary, he was dynamic. The CEO was Danny Jordan. There were a whole lot of people involved, but it was a progressive movement. I don't know where we lost it. Maybe after that, after the SAFA leadership changed, we could have lost it there.
I'm gonna come back to your profile, where Sudesh Singh is from, and your relationship with football. You are saying that there was a point we were headed in the right direction, and in your answer, you mentioned the success of the 1996 team. You mentioned the 1995 Orlando Pirates success. If I look at South Africa then, there were very few development academies. We have a lot of development academies all over the country right now, as opposed to 1995 and the years prior to that. So how do you then say we were headed in the right direction then in terms of development, when today we have so many development academies, a lot of effort is put into developing the game in the country?
I think where we that's a very good point. I think where it possibly went wrong was in the early 90s, there was this collective unity, everyone was going in the same direction, because even when you look at the success of Pirates winning we actually got to go a year or two earlier than that. You look at the success of Cosmos had won the league. They had was it the cup, they had played in the Confed Cup, the African Confed Cup. I think they went to the quarter or semi-final, and there were 6 or 7 of those players who then the next year went to play for Pirates, and they won the Champions League. And from there were 6 or 7 of those Pirates players who were in the Bafana team. So that's a kind of alignment we were talking about. It was not just accidental, there was some thinking behind it. And I think what happened was afterwards could be the country achieving success quickly, and it could have set the wrong mindset. And I think after that, the change of leadership, we started getting influenced too much by foreigners, from Europe. The commercial interest started getting greater in the game, and I think we took our eye off the ball, because we had a solid structure on paper and on the field. If you look at the academy that you talk of, the Francis School of Excellence, and there were also other satellite academies that were feeding players. So now I think the difference could be, yes, we might have a lot of so-called academies, but are they structured? Are they under a uniform philosophy? Is there a specific training methodology that they're all following? And sadly, the answer is no, because today anyone can just open a so-called academy. But we don't realize that there's a difference between youth football and high performance. We tend to lump it all together. And I think that's where we get it wrong, because high performance is the elite part of it, and it's after going through a whole systematic development program. So I think we took our eye off the ball, change of leadership, change of executives on South African football, and eventually all these things disintegrated. So from 96, 97, went to the World Cup 98. After that, it was possibly a downward spiral, because we didn't build on what we had. We actually dismantled it or ignored it, and I would think it's possibly due to lack of technical knowledge, lack of knowledge, football knowledge, lack of vision, because we just thought that success will come easy. Unfortunately, it didn't.
How do you explain the fact that recently with Lego football, we've been seeing a lot of all games on retro football on
Yeah.
TV, and looking at players like your teenage Dadlas, Isinzolewis, John Sonos, Kaiser Matamos, all of those players. How do you explain the fact that there was an era where football development was never taken that seriously? All these players are all, and they're not just players, these are legendary players that came out of South Africa. If you talk about Jomosono, when he arrives all over, they recognize the great Jomosono from South Africa. And these are players that never went through systematic development and stuff like that, as you mentioned. But these are the players that went on to conquer the world. How do you explain that without any proper development, we had such great talent coming out of the country and going on to represent the country with aplomb? And right now, with all this development and investment and everything, we are struggling to replace even a player like Dr. Kumar.
I think that's a brilliant question. It comes to this paradox. And I would like to say, and obviously openly, I think those players' natural talent was there. And I think the reason why they excelled and they went to that level was because there were no coaches. The names that you mentioned, can you actually mention who were the coaches at that time?
Not at all.
We don't know. Even when I was playing myself, some of the coaches, I don't even know who they were. We just played. We trained, we played. So I think in actual fact, the way the game has evolved, we have actually regressed if you look at it. Because now we have academies, we have huge number of so-called qualified coaches, but we are still not producing talent that comes anywhere near to those names that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And those players were playing purely on natural talent, instinctive. It was not accidental. It was pure natural talent. So I think this is where we lost the plot, because we should have looked at what are the progressive nations doing, what are the Brazils doing, what are the Germanys at those time, Italy, and why are they successful? But we didn't do those case studies those time, and as a result, our football got diluted because we had German instructors, we had Dutch instructors, we had English, we had Brazilians. It was a whole mixed mash of everything, and as a result, now that we sit here, South African football doesn't have an identity. We don't have those players that you mentioned that can set the stadium alight, that can turn the game on a 50 cents,
Sure.
So I think although as much as we think we have progress in regard of having academies and educating coaches, but what kind of education do those coaches have if we can't be producing quality players?
Yeah.
So it means our players, I give you an example, even up to this present stage, you go to a Kasi tournament,
Yeah.
festive time. We don't know who are the coaches there, if there are any. It could be just one Grootman from the street,
Yeah.
who the boys respect, and he puts them together and they go and play. But look at the quality that's there. So we have to go a few steps back and say, what are we teaching our coaches? Do we have quality coaches? Because if you want quality players, you can't just expect them to fall from the sky. We need to develop them. So we need quality coaches, but to develop quality coaches, what is the content? What is the curriculum that you're going to teach them? If we're going to be adopting from all over the world,
Yeah.
we're going to end up with coaches who don't have an identity. They're not South African. They all will be wannabe Klopp, wannabe Pep, wannabe Mourinho's, but they don't have an identity. And I think this is where we're going. It's not only in South Africa. I think in African football, I've worked in Asia, in developing countries. In Asia, it's a similar thing where we are obsessed and hooked on foreign ideologies, without realizing if that is suitable to who we are and what we are,
Sure. Right now, before we will talk about the coaching content, you made a point saying you would say that perhaps we have regressed. Are you saying that we were better off then without all these investments? Was South Africa South African football in a better place then without all these academies and everything than it is now with all of these academies?
I think like people misunderstand knowledge. Knowledge on its own is not enough. It's how is that knowledge applied. How is that knowledge implemented that makes it effective. So when I talk about we've regressed in a way, is because given our talent pool, natural talent pool, we have actually not played justice to what we have, because given our talent pool that we have historically and at the present moment, we should be one of the leading football nations on the continent and at least one of the top 20 in the world. So if we talk from that perspective that we have regressed,
Yeah.
definitely I feel we have, because we have not done justice to the talent that we have. You and I know the abundant talent that have been lost to the game, over the years, because players were deemed to be too skillful, too creative, and they were forced out of the game because of coaches not embracing their nature, not realizing the trends, the modern trends of the game. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at today, you do a study of the top 5 most expensive players in the world. Those players are the most creative players in the world, and we all know who they are.
Yeah.
Yet here we have that talent in abundance, but we tend to sideline that, and we go for more the workhorse kind of players. So I think it comes back to coaching, because it's like in school. If you want to go to high school, to university, and you want to become something, you need to have a good teacher or a professor or a lecturer who has relevant knowledge that's going to take you to another level.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest issue I have in South African football and other developing nations is the poor quality of coach education.
Is there hope?
Absolutely. I think as long as we are living and breathing
Yeah.
amid this COVID even,
Yeah.
there's always hope. But we've got to, but hope alone is not going to do the job. It's about having visionary leaders to support your thinking, unity,
Yeah.
the resources. So I think you would have realized recently we started all these Zoom sessions, and that was not from a vanity point of view. That came out of a dire need of a cry, because I know coaches all over the continent, all over the world, especially Asia and developing countries, and they always asking for information. So instead of embracing one person or two people, I thought let's open it up, because just to be more fair and share it. And that's how we initiated the Zoom sessions, to share knowledge. And it's not for once did we think about the commercial interest, that no, the knowledge that we have, or the content that we have, let's sell it, or let's commercialize it and make people pay, because at the end of the day, we want to develop it, we want to help people, and it would be selfish if we hold it.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking if there is hope is, and you also keep on touching of the commercialization of football. The reason I'm asking if there's still hope is exactly about that. If you talk to anybody today, they tell you that football has changed. Football is business. It's all about the result. So there is no time to be talking about the type of football or maybe even the development. Everyone just wants to win. How do you change that mindset?
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, because the mindset has to change. We have to move away from this mindset of short-termism. And if you look at it in Africa, not just in football, we always just want to go for instant results, whether it's politically, business-wise, sport, we want instant result. But if you look at progressive nations, so-called first world nations, they all had long-term plans in place. There's no shortcuts to that. Part of the content that we've done is research on case studies, the successful nations, the Germanys, the Spains, the Brazil. So all of them had long-term plans in place. And I think this is where the major mindset change must happen in African football.
Yeah.
But I must say, slowly and recently, we're having some of our football leaders starting to see the light. We have locally the SAFA president, Danny Jordan, is starting to engage with us, starting to ask about how we can plan and overcome better. We even starting to see this new wave of thinking at the CAF leadership. Ahmed and his executive are now starting to think more progressively, starting to be more inclusive, So I think that's where the hope comes in, when you see, because as much as we can talk and want to do things and we have the knowledge and the theory, but if there's no political will from the leaders to drive that change, everything else is futile.
Yeah. And now the big question is, you're talking about SAFA, you're talking about CAF. Whichever plan that you might want to have, how do you ensure that you as an association have the means or the powers to be able to influence what happens at club level? Because what SAFA may have as a plan may not be what Kaiser Mudao might have as a plan. What SAFA may have as a plan might not be what Takuma may have as a plan when they buy vets and everything. How do you ensure that your plan as an association filters through to the clubs? Because you can never have a plan that excludes them, because they are the carriers of the game at the end of the day.
I think that's an important point. But once again, I'll come to successful nations.
Yeah.
The reason they achieve success, and it's sustainable success, it's not just once off, is because they all work together. You have obviously the National Association and you have the professional wing, and they all work together in alignment with the overall vision of the country and how they want to improve the game. Yeah, so I think what we're talking about, it must be a joint effort from all the football stakeholders. In this regard, I'll give you one of the case studies we did where it was a success of how working together. Forget about the countries that you know, but you take a country like Belgium. Belgium, I think about 14, 15 years ago, the technical director at that time, the FA, they sat with the professional wing and they discussed what they want to do. And the technical directors sat closely with all the club coaches, the professional coaches, and he told them this is what we want to do and how we should do it and why we should do it. Because Belgium were always under the shadow of Holland, their neighbors. But we all know Belgium has a rich history in football, the diversity. So the TD sat with the club coaches of all the first and second division, and he put all the technical aspects on the floor, and it was so important to get their buy-in, and collectively they did that. So every club in Belgium for those 6 to 10 years was playing a 4-3-3 because it fitted in with the national philosophy and the kind of players they want to develop. So coming back to what you are saying, yes, it's a huge problem in South African football, and you can see it in other African countries, is we have two entities that are not talking to each other, So I think hopefully with the FIFA club licensing system, that we can bring people together. But it should be a natural process. It mustn't be a forced process. Because the national organization and the professional wing should not be seen as competitors. We are one. Because the professional wing gets their players from the amateur body eventually, and the national association, the national teams get their players from the professional wing. So if we all don't work together, then we'll never achieve those goals that we think we should be achieving. And that's where you look at case studies. The successful nations manage to all work together in unison, with the overall objectives of what they want to achieve.
So now, with your coaching career, you've managed to also visit other. You've been in the Vietnam and in other places as well. What has been your experience, and how has that developed yourself as a coach?
Yeah, I think I was privileged because of the game to travel and to work in other countries, other continents. But I think it has also reinforced my view that a country or a region should have a specific philosophy and its and its own relevant training methodology, because we're all different. Whether we're Southern Africans, Eastern Africans, Western Africans, whether we, because as you mentioned, I had the privilege to coach twice in Asia, in Vietnam. So Vietnam is Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, those countries. Their players have their own distinct characteristics that shaped by the environment where they live, you know. And then you have Eastern Asia, where it's South Korea, China, Japan. They also have their own kind of characteristics. Then you have South Asia, which is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and then the Middle East. So I think those experiences working there has actually reinforced the belief that we've had in the 90s, that the principle of specifics, you know, developing specific methods, specific philosophies for your environment, because there's no one size fit all or blanket approach where you can take something out of Europe and just impose it unilaterally on another environment without taking into consideration the type of people they are, what they eat, where they live, the climate, you know. So I think for me that was a great experience. And also secondly is to you know, football, as we know, is global. You might not speak the language, but we all enjoy the game, and I think that's what brings the world together. So it's given me the opportunity to coach abroad, has also given me the personally the ability to assess my own personal growth and my ability on a global scale, you know.
So before you continue, you are making one very important point there about football being global. It's one area of much contention. I'm not sure if it born of misunderstanding of what is specific and what is global. In your own explanation, what would you say is global about the game? What is specific about the game? Because the moment you say we need our own identity as South Africa, the default answer that you get from the powers that be is football is universal. What are you saying about South African football?
No, that's a brilliant question. Also, again, I think as you package it or put it, and that's a misconception people have because of lack of knowledge. When it comes to football, the deeper part, principles are always universal. The principles of a philosophy, of a training methodology, they're all universal. But the actual content must be designed according to the specifics of the country. I mentioned to you like simple things. We are Southern Africans. Our body structure is completely different to a West African. The food they eat in West Africa is different to what we eat here. The weather conditions are different. So this is where we say that the content must be designed specifically to that material condition on the ground, but the principles are always universal, and it's how we adapt those principles and design our own. So that's why coming now to the higher level, whereby maybe somebody is a so-called football expert or a leader, would tell you, no, the game is global. But do we not notice Spain has a distinct way of playing? When you look at Spain, the national team playing, you look at Germany, how they play. So that's where we come with the element of specificity. It's not global. Not everyone plays the game the same way. So they will play the game according to their own attributes and characteristics. So that's where we have the difference. When we talk about global, yes, we could talk about the football family getting closer because globally the world is getting smaller. There are ideas being shared. The principles will always be there. The principles of how you train the player, the physiological aspects of it, the volume, intensity, all those parts. The scientific parts are universal, but it's the detail of how we interpret. How do we know what's the strength of my player according to an English player or a German player? There's a vast difference, and I think that's where the one-size-fits-all approach does not work. Because if that worked, then surely by now an African country would have won the World Cup. And surely by now an Asian country or other countries could have won the World Cup. I mean, why is it that there's only 8 countries out of 210 or 11 have won the World Cup? It comes back to the specific nature of the game in that environment. So it's not just football; it's life itself. You look at it culturally, music, business-wise. A businessman who's running a business in New York. Yes, the business principles will be there, but would he do the same thing in say Joburg inner city? Would the same approach work here? It wouldn't. You have to adapt to the material conditions of that environment. So I think it's more lack of knowledge on the part of people when they use this generalization, because generalization, yes, you can call it globally, but to achieve success you have to look at who you are and how you're going to make yourself better. But if I want to be like Pep, it means I'm not going to be the best Sudesh I can be. I'll be a very poor second rate Pep, but I won't be the best Sudesh. What can take me to another level, So it comes back to that level.
Is it, and perhaps this just takes us back to the issue of the commercialization of the game and the economics of the game. Is it still viable to want to stick to those specifics in a world where Europe dominates the market of football? Every nation wants to develop players that can be can catch the attention of European teams and end up playing in Europe. You look at what is happening in Brazil. You look at what's happening, in fact, almost every part of the world, where everybody is developing players that will eventually compete in the EPL, in the UEFA Champions League, in the La Liga. Is it still viable? Does it still make sense to want to focus on the specifics of every nation in terms of developing players?
Yeah, I think that's also an important question. I think the game, the commercial aspects, it's skewed towards Europe, and you look, they will always dominate because, and I think here we also have to give credit to FIFA, and first it was Blatter, then Infantino, where they try to level the playing fields a bit, because it's really unfair when you look at a lot of the commercial interest poured into European football, whether Champions League or EPL, are actually coming from outside Europe. It's either American companies, Asian companies that are pouring in resources. So we need to find a way that how do we level the playing fields where some of those resources are moved to other continents to develop the game there. Otherwise, UEFA and European nations and clubs will always monopolize the game globally at the expense of development. So we need to find a way. FIFA and the confederations need to find a way whereby resources are split equally. And I think in that regard they've been trying a lot, but maybe that's not yet good enough. You mentioned clearly like South America. South America is the biggest supplier of players to UEFA, to the club. Africa is second. And that's to the detriment of the game on these continents, because the CAF Champions League can't reach that level whereby they compete equally, both on and off the field, with the UEFA Champions League, commercially, quality of the play, because always your best players are being snapped up by clubs in Europe. So as long as the commercial interests are always skewed towards UEFA, other continents are not going to develop. And it's good, like FIFA putting measures in place now to sort of level the playing fields, to give more spaces. Even you look at the World Cup, why should UEFA have so many places? Yet CAF, African football, has more member nations in FIFA. Yes, people will talk about performance and commercial aspects, but the playing fields are not level. So what FIFA are trying to do to level the playing fields, yes, I'm a big supporter of that, because I think if you look at it, it actually trickles down to what you were talking about earlier, about the globalization of the game, the influx of foreign coaches to Africa, to Asia, the dilution of identities. So all of those things, I think, is part of this monopoly that UEFA or Europe continues to have over the rest of the footballing world. We always Africa is used as a dumping ground for outdated coaching methodologies. I mean, you look at the history of African football, how many foreign coaches on the African continent, when I say foreign coaches that came out of the continent, have actually left a legacy, positive legacy. It could be just a handful. So you get a lot of foreign coaches coming into Africa just to enhance their CVs. Yet on their own continent, they can't get jobs, and we embrace them here. So it's that mentality of maybe it goes back to social ways, political ways of imperialism and colonialism, whereby we respect something more when it comes from outside than what we actually have here.
Sure. Now, since you're back in the country, what is your involvement with the game, and what can we expect from you going forward? Are there plans for you to coach in the PSL or anything like that?
Yeah, I think for me personally, because many people ask me this question, don't you want to coach in the PSL? Of course, who wouldn't want to? But the thing is, I'm not driven by money or by the fame of appearing on TV. And we look at how many clubs actually have an identity, whereby we could actually have the right environment to work in, So for me, there's very few clubs that I would love to coach or work with in the PSL. But for me, that's not the be-all and the end-all, because I think the greater cause is to educate and develop coaches who can then raise the game at various levels, whether it's at youth level, professional level, locally in South Africa, on the continent. But as a coach, the respect you get when you walk out of the country, and I see that's what we give to foreign coaches in South Africa. When I worked in Vietnam, you get total respect because you are deemed to be an expert who's coming to add value. And as a professional myself, I would like to work in an environment where you are given that respect to do what you know best. You can't be given a club where you have no say on the players that you have, on who comes in and who goes out, on how you do things, so you're basically reduced to the level of possibly a trainer, where Monday to Friday you must just put the players to the bases. On weekend, then they play a game. And also the short-termism, the objectives of club owners in South Africa and the continent are always hooked on winning, But we need to look more of putting a project in place. If there's a project in place where a club owner can say, I have a project, this is what I want to do, a 3 to 5 year project. Not that I want a job for a long time, but it must be a project that's substantial, that you want to do more than just win that game on the weekend. You must, because that's why in African football we have so few clubs that are institutions, because you can get this abnormal scenario where clubs are bought and sold and moved. You'll never find that in European football, People don't think about the fans. They don't think about the heritage of the game. It's like you're buying and selling apples on the street, So I think a lot needs to change. But I still have hope that there are people coming into the game who have vision, who have some good ideas, and hopefully, who knows, going forward, they could be. But for me, I feel happier, I feel more passionate about working outside of South Africa, because I think you get much more respect outside South Africa. You get the working conditions are much more viable, they're much more professional, where you can really work, you can focus on your job on hands and not other things that are negative,
All right. And lastly, is there anything personally that you would like to mention or add to your interview?
Yeah, for me, my dream and my passion is always the improvement of South African football. I'm a proud African, and this continent runs through my blood. If we don't get the opportunity to work on projects in this country to transform our football, then obviously there's other countries outside that we are willing to work with, but I still believe this country has amazing potential on so many levels, and we have the diversity, not just racial diversity. I'm talking about diversity in talent, diversity in intellectual capacity, diversity in humanity, that this country can become an example to the whole world.
Yeah.
And through football, I believe in South Africa, we can also drive social cohesion and integration. We can be a model to the rest of the world. Brazil has done it by winning the World Cups. They've embraced their diversity. We have spoken how Germany changed their whole philosophy and ideology, football ideology, by embracing their own diversity, the immigrants. So in South Africa, I think we should be using football more as a vehicle to bring people together. We sit here in Joburg and we see a whole wide range of immigrants coming from all other African countries, and all of them love football. Do we tap into that? We don't tap into that. Everyone wants to be part of the game. So my dream is to see one day an African country not just winning the World Cup, but becoming a superpower with the Spains, the Germanys, on a sustainable long-term level. And if I can play a small part in that, I will die happily.
Thank you very much for your time, Sudesh.
Thanks.